Xenotoca Lyons are really pretty Goodeid. They used to be Xenotoca eiseni like the San Marcos was, but it's been found to be a separate species, and so now it's called Lyons. They were brought back by Rusty Wessel around in the early 2000s, and they're in the hobby, not real common. But their claim to fame was that, for me, was that I found them at the lab at CU, Colorado University, where they were testing for long fish that could handle wide temperature extremes. And after trying a number of live bears, these were the guys who did the best job. They were put in an outdoor greenhouse where they survived temperatures down to 55 in the wintertime and up to about 84, 83, 84 in the summertime. So it's a fish that can handle wide tolerances. But being Goodeid, they're still a cooler water fish. You could probably keep them long-term pretty comfortably up to as high as about 77, 78. But they, like any Goodeid, they're best at around 68 to 75, 74, actually with most Goodeids. But these guys can handle a little warmer temperature. These guys here are my group of 2 to 4 month olds. I have 3 tanks like this of these, and when you order a group of 6, this is the tank usually that they'll come from, this or one of the others. But of the 3 tanks I've got going, these are some of the largest fish. So you really can't see too many males coloring out yet, but you can usually tell by body shape and by some coloration who's going to be male and who's going to be female. Females certainly have gravid spots developed. See if I can zoom in a little bit here. You can see some of that. And oftentimes the gravid spot in the female is visible before any kind of an andropodium is. And they're much easier to sex by choosing out the females first. This is a tank of Rio Tamazula fry, and they do really well by putting a gravid female into a tank with lots of plants, letting her drop her fry, pulling her, letting her fry grow up for a week or so, and then adding other gravid females to the tank. And the first batch of fry act as dither fish for any babies born down the road. And the older babies are not interested in picking on the newer ones, so you end up just filling up the tank with fry over time. And that's kind of what's going on here. The young are born quite large. They're eating fresh, dry food and certainly brine shrimp right from the start. They're very hardy, you lose very few of them. And they grow fairly quickly. They do sex out fairly early. The Rio Tamazulas are one of those specialty populations that are not real well represented in the hobby. Very beautiful fish. Very, like I say, very well behaved with one another, an excellent hardy fish, a great first Goodeid for those who are looking to get started with them and learn more about them. And if you're looking for them at all, or do you have any questions about them, go ahead and email me at selectaquatics@gmail.com, and I'll get right back to you. Thank you. Okay, so for our first question today, James writes, now James had been at a talk I'd given on live bear husbandry, and so he writes, "Hey Greg, at your talk, you mentioned the 3 generations of acclimation. Does this apply only to live bears?" Okay, well, before I address that, that's a good question. Quickly, the 3 generations of acclimation is simply that, say you buy a fish from someone like myself, and I send you a 2 to 4 month old fish that's about to sex out. So you get them coming to you, and they adjust to your water conditions, and they have most of their life ahead of them to develop and adapt to your conditions. Depending on how long they had lived here, will depend on how much adjustment they have to make. So for the purposes of our arguments, as we're looking at generations, we'll call the fish you receive generation 1. And they'll do well. They'll live out their mostly full lives. Their reproduction might be adequate. Their color and size should be good. But it's the fish that they have, the young that they give birth to, that are born in your water, that will really start showing some adaptation and some acclimation, and you'll start getting bigger size, some bigger broods, and better color. And then my experience has been that it's the young of those, generation 3, where the line begins to settle down and begins to really look at their best, and they really begin to fully acclimate to your water conditions, and you start seeing really large fish with best color and reproducing like they should. Now, whether or not this applies to live bearers or not, I don't know, but my suspicion is that it probably does. The problem is, or the issue is that, say you're dealing with cichlids. I had someone write me about Oscars today. So Oscars take 10 months to reach sexual maturity. You're going to end up with a generation time of at least a year. Whereas with live bearers, you're dealing with 8 months generation times for the swordtails. And if you're a guppy breeder, you're dealing with 4-month generation times. So those who are working with guppies first noticed this and first saw this. And that's mentioned in the videos we're going to go to. And so to further look at this a little closer and see how some lines here have changed over generations, we'll go down to the fish room. These Xenotoca lyonsi are an interesting example of this as well. I got these from the lab where I worked at the Colorado University, and they had been at that university for probably about 6-7 years. So they were well established and had done well. I received about 30 of them, and then stared at them for well over a year, almost a year and a half, before I got the first spawn. I really kind of had almost given up on them and didn't think it was going to actually happen. So I got that first spawn, grew them up, and over the course of the next few, after that first spawn was born, I did receive 15 fish over a couple of spawns. But it took, like I say, about a year and a half to get them. Those 15 fish, once they grew up in my water, just took off. Now, these are those 15 fish, plus some of their young. And now, today, which is only about a year later, you go on up here, and these are full of females that are dropping their fry of the lyonsi. Here's a group of lyonsi growing out, and another group here of lyonsi growing out. So it took an adjustment to my water before they kicked in, and then once that happened, we're home free. So the next generation will be probably the last one where they'll be totally acclimated to the environment here, and where they'll probably be as prolific as the doodroi are. Here I have a ton of doodroi, and they're doing really well. So, but they've also been here for about 5 years. Now the doodroi here had a more exaggerated acclimation over the first couple generations than what is common for most fish. These are what these guys look like today, obviously. And as I mentioned, they've been here about 5 years. I got them from someone that had kept them in large numbers in some 55-gallon tanks and had them for many years, but their water quality was not real great, and they got fed maybe once a day, usually a poor quality flake food, and over time the line deteriorated by not being watched. And I'll show you here. Here's a picture of what this fish looked like when I first obtained it. At the time I didn't have a good camera, so I had a friend come by and he had a camera, and we took this picture. Give you an idea, you can see that they're kind of like a muddy green and a mix of the orange and the red, but it was not a particularly attractive fish. So then I kind of stuck them into a lower tank, a 40-gallon tank near the floor where it was cooler, and just fed them and took care of them. Good water changes, good food. And I almost never sold any, even though I posted them at the website with that picture. So now with these guys, I went down there and checked on them, and I thought, well, I probably ought to get some decent pictures. And I pulled these guys out about a year ago and was shocked to see how they came up in the photo tank. And so this is what they look like now, and they're breeding consistently. And with good care, they'll keep looking like that. But I don't selectively breed them otherwise. You know, I don't choose the best males or whatever. They're fairly consistent, and they don't really need that. They just need decent care, and they will improve and do very well for you. This first picture is of one of the male voliferas that I received initially, still in the acclimation container, 4 years ago when I first received them. You can see by the paperclip beneath him that this fish is just about 3 inches, if that. Paperclip's about 1 inch long. He was a nice, healthy fish. You can see his color looks good and all of that. But he's already got the sail fin dorsal, the color is well established, and as you can see, his size is only at about 3 inches. This second pic is of a group from that first batch that I received. I received about 10 fish. There are 2 young males on the bottom, a female on top. The male on the bottom right is a little older. You can see it there again. 3 inches is being generous. But they're healthy, good, robust fish, and they're just starting their first time here at Select Aquatics. Those fish in this picture had been in the tanks for about a month when this picture was taken. I'm back here now at one of the volifera tanks, and I'm shining in on a male. This guy here, this gives you an example. He's my 3rd generation, and I couldn't have dreamed of males that are going to be as big as he's going to be when I first obtained these guys. As a matter of fact, he's about the size of my biggest male, and you can see he's just beginning to sex out. His anal fin is only beginning to thicken. His dorsal fin is only beginning to get a little bit of red in it, and he's already about 3 inches. So that fish there, when he does sex out, he's going to end up being a good 5 inch, 5.5, 6 inch fish. But that would not have been possible in my first generation. Wherever it is, there he is. And that's just an example of a fish that, you know, of what happens when you get toward your 2nd and 3rd generation as they become bigger and healthier and more adjusted to your water. The Zoogeneticus tequila is a good example of what I'm talking about here. These guys, I first obtained them in the mid-90s, and I ended up going through obtaining them 4 different times before I got a population that survived for me and did really well. Granted, I probably didn't quite know what I was doing at the time, but also I was dealing with lines that I received from people that had generally only been in their water for maybe 1 generation, 2 generations tops. And I found that they were, you know, the first couple of years they were a little slow to reproduce and didn't do as well. They've now been here for 13 years, and they're one of my most prolific fish and certainly one of the hardiest. In this tank, for instance, it tends to get overgrown with algae, and one of the things that they do is they turn dark when they're happy. The males, when they're ready to breed and are feeling frisky, will get very dark. They'll get almost charcoal brown with that bright yellow stripe in the tail. There should be somebody in here that's that way. We can see fairly closely. There we go. And so with the darker algae sides, they tended to get that way more consistently, and I'm assuming that that's a good thing. So I've left this tank to go ahead and get algaed up, and they do very well in here. And so from this tank, I pull the gravid females and move them out to breeding tanks where they then drop their fry. So you're probably wondering, if I have these tequilas, this is a group of young growing out, if I keep these tequilas, will I have the same problem? In other words, You know, will it be the second or third generation before I get big, robust, really hardy fish? And it comes down to how far you are from my water qualities. So if you're, for instance, your water is especially hard and your pH is quite different than mine. For instance, if your pH is up around 8.0, which, you know, in the wild is closer to what their preferences are, even though my pH here is about 7.4, and say your water is at about 250 or 300 parts per million, mine here is 90, and even though your qualities are closer to what their wild preferences are, you might find that it's going to be into your second or third generation before you get fish that are reproducing as they're supposed to, and that will look as good as you expect them to. This concept I'm talking about, the sense that when you buy something and you raise it up and get it healthy and breed it, that it will actually be the second or third generation before you see fish that are totally acclimated to your environment and look their best. That is actually a well-known concept in another aspect of the aquarium hobby. I used to be involved in show guppies. So show guppies back in the 90s when I was doing it would run a good quality trio would run about 90 bucks plus shipping. Today they're about 150. And people see the fish at the breeder's house and they think, oh man, you know, I want to have that fish. So they go out and they'll buy a trio, or they'll buy two trios. Usually you should buy two trios, so if you have any losses, you don't lose the line. All you need to do is lose a male with a trio and you're stuck. So anyway, breeders found out that the next generation you're going to get from those adults are not going to look suddenly like all the fish at the breeder's fish room, particularly if your water qualities are substantially different in any way. With the show guppies I was dealing with then, their care was such that it didn't take much to differ your husbandry from what they were accustomed to. The point being that it would easily be the third generation before you'd start getting fish that looked like what you saw at the breeders. And that's routine. These are the Xenotoca doedroi, and they just get big and robust. They've been here now about 8 years. Not that long, about 5 years. And they're now perfectly hardy and they breed like crazy. So, of course they were a little slow getting started, but now they're doing really well, and they're well established and they're stable, and I'm sure they'll do well for you as well. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that the fish won't look good that you get in their first generation, or that the fry of the first generation won't look good. They'll be just fine, they'll look great. It's just that they'll continue to improve and get larger, and their color will get better with each generation. And it pretty much settles down then by the third into the fourth generation. This is one of the albino plecos, the albino green dragons, that is being grown out to be a future breeder. Okay, Andrew writes, do you know about the Goodeid Working Group, the GWG? Is it possible to contact them to get fish? The Goodeid Working Group is an organization in the Netherlands, and it's a collection of fish keepers throughout Europe that are each breeding a certain species of the Goodeids, so that they're trying to maintain reserve populations of every species of the Goodeid genus, which is some 45 species. The way they do this is they have a big facility where they have tanks where they maintain the fish there, but more importantly, they have a database of dozens, possibly hundreds of aquarists, each who have committed to keeping a certain species, and so they know where their reserve stocks are, and those fish are always available, et cetera, et cetera. And I assume in the Netherlands that the members are able to contact one another. Well, the Goodeid Working Group contacted the American Live Bearer Association a while back, and John Lyons got involved, and he has taken over and formed a North American Goodeid Working Group. But here in the U.S., we don't have a central place where all of the species are being maintained, but the U.S. organization is basically a large database of members who keep Goodeids that then write the GWG and apply to become a member. It doesn't cost anything. And then you send them a listings of all of the fish that you have, the Goodeids you have, and you go into that database. Then the members can contact one another to obtain fish from one another. But the Goodeid working group itself is not in a position to satisfy customers coming to them who are not members looking for fish. So the way to get fish from the people in the Goodeid working group would be to obtain some Goodeids from myself or whomever, and then apply. Go ahead and say what you've got. You've made a commitment to hold on to these Goodeids for a few generations, and then you have access to the other members on the list, and you can contact people to find out who's willing to ship, etc., etc. So I had just recently talked with John Lyons about this, and he kind of explained to me that that's how it works. They're really not in a position to answer phone calls or emails from people looking for fish. But he would certainly love to hear from you if you want to go ahead and go to the website and then apply to become a member. So thanks. Thank you for watching this video on the Xenotoca Lion's Eye. And in 2 weeks, the next video is going to be on a fish that still is not yet identified. And we know it as Limia tiger, and it was first discovered in 1999 by Dominic Isla. And we can talk more about that in the next installment. Thanks for coming by.